job is to sell that story. So the people sitting at the table are like, oh, that makes so much sense. But if I'm only giving them snippets of a story, then the story isn't really being told, which is why HR sometimes feels like they're not heard or they're getting pushback.
We're the Headcount People. Our podcast talks about all things headcount management, and our guests are the masters. If you're in charge of planning, managing, or reporting on headcount and headcount spend, we'll help you crack the code on this delicate dance by giving you strategies and tools from the masters themselves. Make sure to subscribe and follow for every new episode right when it drops. Here's your host, Tushar Makhija.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the new episode of the Headcount People. And today I have with me Alisa Avelar, who has been a VP CHRO over the last decade at multiple hypergrowth companies. And I met Alisa when we started building Team Ohana. And I always left every meeting after talking with Alisa, learning something new about the true nuances of company building, org design, headcount planning. There is such institutional knowledge, Alisa, that you have that I'm so excited to dig deeper today. And, so glad that you are generous enough to share this information with everybody on this podcast today. So welcome.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I think the platform is amazing. Your vision is strong. So it's easy to attach to our conversations because we start with, what are we trying to solve today? And then you and I are talking about 24 months, 5 years, 10 years of what it really looks like in terms of workforce planning for an organization.
Before we get into the meat of the conversation, well, it would be great if you can just tell us about how did you enter HR, your past experience, and then you have survived being a head of HR for a long period of time. And yes, all the other HR leaders would agree when I use the words ups and downs, pandemic, recession, what have you. How do you do it? And what is your superpower?
Oh, that's a loaded question. I think many may be able to resonate with this is that I fell into HR. It was not something I did not decide I was going to go to school and then be an HR leader. I fell into it really because I love the learning and development side of that, really helping them find their passion and then building a career map and a career journey and what are the tools they need to learn. And so from there, that kind of evolved my HR career road. And then I learned all the other, great pieces of that, employee performance and how do people elevate themselves and upskilling an organization, the hiring and finding great talent and finding talent where, you would never know that there's talent, which is why I'm a huge remote work advocate, because I think you can find talent in a much larger radius than just, your comfort circle. I will say survival mode and perseverance, especially the last 3 years. HR has been a rough roll through the pandemic, post-pandemic. And what is the new normal of an organization? What is the new normal of HR? What is the new normal for an employee? And so we're all navigating that while, what I've said is please give everybody grace and patience while we navigate this new place that we're all trying to be at, because we're never going to be pre-pandemic. And True. We have a new world, so to speak. And so now we just need a little bit of grace and patience while we navigate what that's supposed to look like. But meanwhile, guess what? Things are moving a million miles an hour. Organizations are still in hyper growth, moving really fast, needing to grow really fast. And so grace and patience tends to be more incremental when a business needs to grow exponential. I think that would be my superpower to answer your question, is really trying to pause, observe, and provide grace and patience, and try not to be jumping to a solution or a fixer, even though that is my first initial thought is like, oh, how do I fix this? But learning to kind of just observe and offer grace and patience, but then also be patient with others as well, I think is a big piece of the new way of work. And that doesn't always align with what a business needs because they're trying to grow in revenue and boards and all those things.
It's like such a important piece because, as a CEO myself, I sometimes struggle with the fact that I'll give a live example, is that we like to give people the last week of December off because I personally don't like to work the last week of December. I need to decompress. But I do find myself sometimes when I hear from my engineering team or the product team saying things like, we won't be able to get this done by the end of the year. We'll reconvene at the beginning of January. And then I immediately switch and say, no, you're going to work on the 26th, 27th, 28th, and you're going to finish this. And then they laugh. It's like, this is like, and then, again, this is just like the tussle or the fight that is going on in the head, is that there is a right thing to do. But then there is this impulse around the business, right? Oh my God, are we going to miss a deal? Or are we going to delay a feature? How do you coach the CEOs or how do you coach the C-suite to follow these guidelines of patience, giving people the benefit of the doubt, and just being good humans?
Grace and patience is relative, right? And everybody's probably shaking their head. It doesn't always work. And the CEO or the leadership team has a vision. They're trying to close out the goals, revenue, whatever it may be. The board could be pressing and just trying to finish the year strong. And what I always try and say is that sometimes business wins and sometimes people wins. And there's this ongoing of give and take. And I know both sides can say like, well, I've given a lot and I've given a lot. Just being patient with that as a leader is there a compromise? Can we do both? And I know these seem like very, what's the word I'm looking for? Very abstract. Oh, that's in a utopia and things of that nature. But I think pausing, what is going to get the most productivity out of our employees? Having them work that last week of December is like, how much are you really getting done? Are you going to get 40 hours from everybody? Probably not.
Probably not.
Because you know what? The first 51 weeks of the year, you were getting how much every week? You were probably getting 60 hours a week. And
True.
So now you're asking them, it's like sprinting a marathon. And people that know me say, I say this a lot, is like, you cannot sprint a marathon.
You have to pace yourself. Yeah.
Exactly.
But I think, again, right, I think you have really been part of hypergrowth at multiple companies. You have seen headcounts get doubled. You have seen budgets get slashed. You literally lived through the, hey, I have a lot of money to spend versus I have no money to spend. In all of this, and then your leadership can be also anxious because their goals are tied to certain, and their payout is tied to certain goals that they have to hit. How do you influence the leadership? And how do you make sure that you can't just walk into the room and people start listening to you, right? That you have to, it's a build up. And I think there is a lot of, to the listeners, I believe that we want to show them the both sides of the coin, is that all the hard work that you did in the beginning to get the seat on the table so that you can influence decisions. So any tips, tricks on, or like guidelines, what should be followed in order to get the seat on the table?
It's a two-way street. And it's not going to be an answer that everybody likes, because we got the seat at the table and we have a voice, but you need the people sitting at the table to actually listen.
True.
So that's the big piece. And everybody has to be willing to listen to everybody. And if you're at a product company, you have to realize that you're going to have to speak twice as often to be heard. If there's anything that I've learned as being an HR leader, is that don't be passive. Being that annoying, lack of a better analogy, is be that annoying younger sibling. Is like, if you have the information and you know that this is good information that you can take to the bank, then you should be talking to all of your peers. You should be getting proactive buy-ins, running by your peers. And so that when you go to sit at the table and you bring this information, you have somebody in your court saying, oh, yes, this is something that I've spoken to, the HR leader about, and this is something that, yes, we should do. So just as much as you have your go-to-market teams that rally around each other, you may need to have your G&A leadership rally around you, just like you should be supporting as a head of HR. The CFO and the HR should be marching side by side. They control the money, you control the people. It's very important to stay connected. But you need an ally too. So pull somebody over from go-to-market, sell the head of sales. You're going to need allies, because you'll notice that your product and engineering may be at odds, but engineering is going to maybe side with sales, or you'll start to see allies at the table. And this is probably some of that, non-HR people don't want to hear, but you're going to start seeing where people rally behind each other. You're going to need your own cheerleading squad as well. Go in it alone, because that's not going to help your cause. And I know that sounds terrible, because it's like, oh, I can't bring data and just be at the table. I have to bring data and then bring a squad with me. One, usually people say no to the first time they hear information, right? The immediate is no, because nobody likes change. If I sat down at the table and said, oh, our attrition rate is 35%, and it's the first time everybody's hearing it at the table,
this is going to be chaos.
Yes, it's shock. What do you mean 35% when everybody is thinking attrition rate is in the teens, right? You want to build up to the conversation at the table. This is the big thing, is no shock and awe, no surprises. And it's not about rallying your peers against each other, but it's keeping them informed along the way. Are you sharing the information regularly enough where if you said attrition was 35%, nobody would be shocked? They knew that as they've been paying attention. If they are shocked and you've been sharing information, then you know that not everybody's looking at the information. And then why aren't they looking at the information? Because we should all be concerned if there is a spike in attrition or a change in anything that's going on around our people.
So this is a very important point you just made, because I think I can draw a parallel between, we have a product dashboard which is telling us if we are going to get to the end of the sprint and when are we going to get to the end of the sprint. And there is a high probability of either meeting the date or missing the date. And a lot of this discussion happens a full quarter in advance, right? As the company, and especially in sales, you cannot show up at the last day of the quarter and say, sorry, we are missing our number, right? You have to report on it every day. You also said something very interesting about the HR dashboard. If I stop anybody on the streets of San Francisco who's worked in tech, they can tell you the dashboard for product, for engineering. They can actually tell you dashboards even now for finance, right? HR dashboard, two questions come to mind. Is HR data driven so that they have a dashboard? If indeed they are, what are you tracking? What are the data points that you believe a company should have on a HR dashboard?
There's so many things to track when it comes to people, because people are led by emotion, and those can kind of be like this throughout a period of time. And so you're trying to find maybe 5 or 6 metrics that that give you the pulse of the organization at any given time. Regardless of what that metric is, you're going to get a good feeling of what that is. Obviously, attrition, people are paying attention to regretted turnover. And that's super important. Are you losing people that you don't want to lose?
Right.
Turnover is important, but who are you losing is even more important. Are you taking care of your high-performing employees? Are you taking care of those superstars that are looking to grow and excel, and they're helping drive your organization? Are those the ones leaving? Or the ones that are leaving are strong performers and they're just willing to sit in the seat, your core players? Or are you losing underperformers because they realize it's not the organization that they can be successful in?
Right.
So you have turnover, and then we'll drill down into regretted turnover, or things that I look at. Time to hire is super important. Does it take a long time for our organization to hire somebody? Why? 2 years ago, I could hire people in days, where maybe 4 or 5 months ago, it may have taken longer if we were looking for a very specific skill, experience, things of that nature. So that's super important, because also the other thing is, if you're having difficulty hiring, where's your employer branding? How are people even feeling about your organization? Do they know your organization? Think of all the new startups and tech companies where people don't even know that they exist, and that the opportunities are there. And so how are there's new startups. So those are two of the things that I look at. Obviously, there's a lot of other ones. If you were to ask a CFO, they probably want to know revenue per employee. That's going to be super important to the board and your peer group at sitting at the table. Pulse survey, where's the culture sitting? Your DEI numbers. DEI numbers as a whole are super important. But what I also look at is how many of our underrepresented groups are actually being promoted or moved into higher level roles. That's something that it's great if we're hiring from underrepresented groups, what's your internal mobility look like after you bring them in? Like recruiting can do a great job about bringing in underrepresented groups. And you're like, oh, we're hiring them. Okay, but where are they? If they're sitting in the same roles you hired them at, are we actually truly diverse and inclusive and offering equitable experiences? I always look at, DEIB as kind of, there's several prongs that you need to look at. You just can't show a chart and saying like, oh, look at our underrepresented groups, because, you could say that that's how many you have, but what is their experience inside of your organization? That's the key. And so you really need to, are they engaged? Are they participating? And so those may not seem as important when you look at a dashboard, but if you were a leader, you would want to know, okay, I'm focused on hiring underrepresented groups and they're succeeding in our organization. That's the key right there. And let's be honest, I'm probably going to jump forward a bit. With 4 generations in the workplace, what are our younger generations focused on is that they want to see the same experience for everybody. And so if we want to tie that back into headcount and hiring, it's like, do we have things in place so that when we are hiring from these groups, that they have a place to feel like they're included, they're wanted, and they're feeling valued?
And just as you mentioned in the beginning, right, being remote is now a big plus because you have access to talent pools around the world. And, we've heard a lot about folks going to Army veterans and bringing them into the workforce. And similarly, there is a lot of good talent. And the only way we can move forward is by tapping into those networks and actually nurturing them and making them more productive. So I love the nuance because we've heard a lot about DEIB, dashboards, and those vanity metrics. But what does it really mean? You have to dig deeper. It's not just about hiring, it's about internal mobility and growth. So I think that's a very interesting point. But let's try to double click on the first part I said, right? That HR traditionally is not known to be data driven, right? What have you done in terms of tooling or investment in people in your team so that you can actually build out that data infrastructure? And if you have like names of companies that people can go and look into as useful tools that even you've used, or what spreadsheet models have you created, just tell us everything.
I will say, and this is why you and I are having this conversation, because I think the very first conversation we had is that there is not a tool out there that gives an HR leader or an HR team the data that they need. It's being pulled from several places. And then we have to put it into Google Sheets or Excel and create our own charts and our own dashboard. And it's very manual. If you think about it, you could go to the job boards, and people analytics is now this up and coming role within the people. Right. Why is that? Because there are no tools that I can say, oh, I need to know attrition. I need regretted attrition. I need to know about revenue per employee. I need to know about my DEI metrics. How many people have been promoted? What is my compensation equity? All of these things that people come to us and saying like, are we paying our underrepresented groups fairly? Okay, well, you know what I would have to do that? Let me go pull a data report. Then I have to go to this other place that I may have done my compensation merit cycles and things. And you and I have talked about this. And, can Team Ohana do this? Because if I'm workforce planning, and I have everybody's salary in there, I know their tenure, I know their gender, I know all of these things about this, all these demographics information. I can say like, oh, this has been the mobility of our organization. And what's the profile? And can we say what a successful profile is within the organization? Would that help hiring? Would that help promoting? Would that help performance? All of those things. So in terms of tooling, in a long-winded way, it's still very manual. It's pulling some from the HRIS. It's pulling some from maybe your performance tool. It's pulling from your survey tool. And they all do great jobs, but each tool is focused on one thing, which is why you and I have said, like, what if we had that dashboard? Because you know what that dashboard would tell me? Instead of me spending 6 hours every week in updating a dashboard and making sure those numbers are right, and then going to the Monday morning meeting to be able to advocate for things that we need. What if the dashboard is there? And then I can go to my peers sitting at the table and saying, hey, I read your monthly business review, or hey, you're looking to hire X number of people. We should look to see where they should go into your organization. Then you can really get org design. You can't even get into org design because one, hiring is somewhat reactive for a short-term goal versus a long-term goal. So being able to understand what's going on in the organization in terms of the people allows us as HR leaders and just HR team members as a whole. I mean, the BPs honestly do a lot of the work. The BPs are feeding it up to the VP of HR. And then, basically we're selling the story. And our job is to sell that story. So the people sitting at the table are like, oh, that makes so much sense. But if I'm only giving them snippets of a story, trailers per se, sporadically, then the story isn't really being told, which is why HR sometimes feels like they're not heard or they're getting pushback. And one of the things I've learned is that I'll say it. I may not be pushy enough. I may sound pushy here for whatever reason, but I'm not. And I observe a lot, take things in, and then I want to. And I think one of the things I've learned is that you honestly have to be overly pushy and say like, no, this is important. We need to have a conversation. If we need to have another conversation and come back to the group, I'm happy to do that. But we need to have this conversation because I don't think I may not be articulating what I need you to hear. So let's have can we have a collaboration and then narrow it down on what it is that I need to get across to these other people sitting at the table. So the data piece comes from a variety of sources. That's the one issue I've always had in HR is that what am I gaining by adding a tool? What am I giving up? If I'm looking at a new HR system or a performance tool, it's like, okay, what can I live without? Because they generally will not have everything I need. And I need to figure out what it is that I can live without, which is, I know I keep plugging your tool, but you and I've had so many visionary conversations about like, this would be amazing if I could just click and be like, oh, this is what our data looks like. Or, oh, I'm starting to see it trend differently. When you have to do, people always say, oh, HR says, I have this gut feeling or based on my experience. And it's because we have remembered those trends and metrics in our head from all of our time and experience. So anybody that's been in HR longer than, I would say 8 or 9 years has seen things come to fruition 2 or 3 times. So they already know where the pitfalls are. So when they start to experience that again, they're like, stop, hold on. And then someone will say, well, where's the data for that? And I'm like, the last 3 companies, that experience. And so if we can then put that experience into data and a dashboard that people can look like on a regular basis, I would love somebody to come to me and say like, I'm noticing these trends in the time to hire and regretted attrition and our revenue per employee is dropping. What's going on? I'm always the one saying like, hey, all of these are happening. What's happening in sales? What's happening in marketing? Did we change something? It's like all of these things that affect the business. Business affects the people and people affects the business, but we haven't made that connection of like reviewing a business review and then poking holes in it. We missed our goals for the sprint. Well, why? And I will be honest, in saying I probably didn't ask why enough if I was sitting in a business review of why didn't you miss your sprint? Did you expand bandwidth? Did you have 3 people go out? Did you forget you had 2 people on parental leave? Did you not scope the project well enough? What was the issue? Was people the issue, or was it something to do with a technical piece?
Right. I will remember everything that you just said and just enlist some of these points. The number one, for all my VC friends listening to this podcast, you need to invest in HR tech. Stop investing just in dev tools and engineering companies. You must be investing in HR tech because good people strategy equals great company strategy. And I think that you have outlined and highlighted that in the last few minutes when you said that there is always an underlying thing that is happening in the company, the cause and effect. But we only look at the net result and try to dissect it rather than going more deeper. And HR has to play a very important role there. And I think it's like every other department as well, right? As salespeople, we come with scar tissue. As product people, we call it scar tissue, call it learnings. And then I think the only difference is that all these other functions are able to marry the qualitative and quantitative together but the quantitative is the missing piece. I mean, the vision that we are moving towards is that there has to be this unified data layer. And on top of that, there is different systems of engagement, which can be headcount planning, compensation planning, people analytics, but those are all workflows. And then on top of that, and this is where I want to ask you about AI, is that you just mentioned that the real work is done by the HR VPs who take this data, or I would say there is a lot of data that can be brought together in a dashboard and then it becomes information. But that information has to be converted into wisdom. That is only happening at the HR VP level. Can machines or can AI help in, I heard this somewhere, Iron Man this job position, that suddenly the HR VP now has this Iron Man suit and they are off to the races? What are your thoughts on this whole AI revolution?
I find AI as a support mechanism. AI should never be making decisions for people. People should always be superior than the machine, right? We've seen many movies play this out.
Yes.
And if you were to look at what's going on in the workplace right now, is that there is a disconnect. Employees are feeling a certain way and organizations are feeling a certain way. And the bridge is broken. And AI is not going to fix that. Relationships fix that. That means communication, sitting down at the table, grace and patience, listening, all of those things is what happens. So when you start inserting a tool to fix something, I will say people move incrementally while product or organizations want to move exponentially. People are naturally resistant to change. Why is that? Because the fear, or they want to know what the end result is going to be. And, this AI thing is moving exponentially. No one wants to have their job replaced or to think, can you imagine, is that what if my boss was harassing me and AI is where I have to go first?
Very valid point. Yeah. It doesn't end well, right?
No, it's not. Because AI is going to say like, oh, you should go, and even we do this as HR. It's like, we would love for people to be able to resolve things on their own. We want people to be able to come to the table and actually have conversations. That cannot always happen. We get that. But if that was your first option, what do you think would happen to the workforce at that point?
They'll be further disconnected, I would say.
What do disconnected employees do?
Leave and find a better home. Right?
Exactly. AI is not the solution. We're already seeing where AI has been a problem in applicant tracking systems. And so it can't replace someone's true empathy. A machine could say, oh, I'm sorry that you feel that way. Does that make you feel better? Or if you were to able to connect with another human being, heartbeat to heartbeat, and saying like, oh my gosh, that's horrible. I'm so sorry that you experienced that.
Yeah. Especially when you mentioned the applicant tracking systems. I mean, there is a base, there is what is show and tell and what is reality. Have you experienced that there has been biases where AI is, say, rejecting resumes or of certain sections of society or certain people?
I have not been a part of that. I've been very lucky to be at organizations where we have never allowed the system to say like, oh, here's the top 10 resumes.
Yeah.
Everywhere I've been, recruiters have always wanted to look at resumes. Even when I'm recruiting for my own team, I would go in and look at resumes, and I'm looking more for experience versus titles and, really understanding what did you actually do? Because I also understand that titles don't always correlate with a certain level of experience. I always say small companies, big titles, big companies, smaller titles. And so what did you actually do? And I think the summary of super important. They're talking about how to put in white letters inside of your resume so that the AI and the ATS will catch it and pull you in. And to me, I think you're breaking out this human element even more. We've talked about how technology has already done that to humans, right? We already have difficulty connecting as human beings. The pandemic was horrible. We are mammals at the core of who we are. We are meant to run in packs. 18 months of isolation absolutely was detrimental. And you're now adding another piece of technology to fix things. Fix what? relationships between people need to be fixed by people. And the only way that happens is when people want to sit down at the table and are willing to communicate and offer grace and patience. And right now, and you can see, I was sharing this with another colleague the other day. We were chatting and I said, you go on LinkedIn and you hear all these things about leadership and communication. And then you go onto social media and employees are like, yeah, not buying it.
Yeah.
And so now, turning things around is like hiring and development, and where I would love to see data coming in for tools for HR teams and even for leaders in that matter is being able to look at your team in an org structure, knowing who your high performers are, who is looking for coaching, who has tapped into all the training that your organization offers, who are people that are hungry to grow. And I've also said this too, who are people like, hey, I really like my role. I don't need to have 10 goals to the next level. I really would like to do my job really well. That's okay too, keep those employees. But being able to look at your organization holistically and then being able to sit with a senior leader and saying like, we are doing the next 12-month planning. What is it that you expect your org to look like over the next 12 months? So don't go and put in a headcount request for a manager. Like, can we promote from within? And so that's why I say sometimes right now when you're growing at all costs or you don't have that holistic backup and look at the organization as a whole, you're hiring reactively. And I've seen it as almost at every single organization, an employee will see manager, on the careers page. And they're like, I've said I wanted to, and now you have an employee that wanted to grow and be a people manager and all of these things. And then they literally saw the job that they would want posted in the careers page without, and without any kind of consideration. So how do you balance, oh, we need external talent. Well, if that's what you continue to say, what do you think your employees are going to do? They're going to go find
growth somewhere else,
talent somewhere else.
I want to bring you back to this. We touched upon this topic multiple times now, where traditional HR solutions have been point solutions. If you have to take a 30,000 foot view, why is that? I mean, why are people not just going to Workday? It does everything. So I think I have a third part as well, but let's start with the two-part question. It's like, if you look at the last 15 years, you've got amazing HR solutions, ATS solutions, performance management solutions. Each of these are multi-million-dollar categories in themselves. It organically creates these silos. So why do you think this is? Is it that hard to bring all of this together? And then do you believe that HR would be better served with an all-in-one solution?
All-in-one would make our lives easier, wouldn't it?
I mean, it's a great promise, all-in-one, but it is like only some parts of the all-in-one may work well. But again, I mean, you probably get pitched a gazillion times by startups to buy things, right? Me included. So how do you feel about this? Like, why do you think in the last 15 years we've had amazing HR systems, but they are mostly point solutions? They are not thinking more holistically, bringing everything together.
I think the industry is in a reactionary state. We're not developing for the future. We're developing for kind of what is now point in time or history. And so we looked forward enough to saying, like, we were so busy trying to get it to seat at the table, but we didn't know what we were going to bring to the table. And I know that sounds horrible. And everybody, I can just see the HR leaders listening and they're like, she just does not say that. Like, the tools did us no justice. And if you're not an Excel whiz, we all became data analysts and we didn't know it because the tools did not provide us. And then, yes, you do have, Workday, UKG, all of these big solutions are great, but they're big and expensive and you need individuals to actually be specialists, experts in those tools. And the average company, that's not in the budget. As you said, HR is a non-revenue generating function. And then I'm supposed to go ask for this extremely robust tool. So what happens is there's all of these small startups that are catering to smaller, startup hypergrowth organizations, and then the SMB. And so I think they're, just like you have the local corner sandwich shop and then you have Subway, right? You're managing to the masses depending on what you want your business to be. But I think what happens is when they build the tools, when recent software I've used for HRIS is that they're offering data, and this is a repeat offender statement, is that the data is on what we needed 5 years ago. It's on data we need 5 years from now.
Give an example. What is the data that we need 5 years from now?
Well, the holistic, like how do I look at the organization as a whole and being able to see that I have the boxes, the org structure. You and I have talked about this. I'm like vertical or horizontal org structure. And I want names. I want demographics. I want salary. I want to be able to, roll the cursor over it. And it gives me this pop-up and it says, oh, Mary has been with the organization for 3 years. She's been promoted once. She's had 4 merits. Like, where is that data in a visualization versus running an Excel spreadsheet?
Right.
And I would have to run 3 or 4 Excel spreadsheets and then merge and VLOOKUP. Again, becoming a data analyst.
But, Workday is a very successful company doing, if not millions, billions of dollars in revenue. Who is buying Workday then? Is there a time and place in an organization that they can go to Workday? And what is that inflection point for you or in your opinion?
If your organization is planning to be more than 2,500, 3,000 people, then you may want to buy Workday early on. And you realize that you're doing an early investment knowing that your goal is to get to 5,000 employees or 3,000 employees. When I initially went from an SMB HRIS to UKG, which was actually Ultimate Software at the time, it was before they actually merged with Kronos, I think we were probably right around 450, but we knew that we were going to grow over 1,000. So we knew that if I just moved from one SMB HRIS to another one, I'd end up moving again in another 2 or 3 years. And I was like, oh, what can I buy for that next 5+ years? But
what do you get? How do you think an SMB HR system is different than a mid-market system? What do you get in addition?
That's funny that you said that because you have to be a specialist to work within some of those data tables, right? But you need those data tables as you kind of outgrow. So what I have found, is being at the several organizations I've been at, that 400 to 500 employee size is about the time where you have the pain point of needing a much more robust HRIS for data, where I have multiple data tables. I can pull multiple information. But guess what? Now you need to be a data expert. You have to be that analyst person because the way that you're pulling the data or the way that the data tables are created on the back end of those systems are not always intuitive. They're hard coded in some ways. I will give you an example. If I needed to pull social security numbers for my US employees, so maybe I need to do a comparison with a benefit report and make sure everybody's social right for whatever reason. That is not actually in the personal profile data table in one of those softwares. It's actually stored, and this may be old data, but this was probably 2.5 years ago. The social security number was actually in the I-9 data table. That's not intuitive of where I would look for somebody's social security number. I would look for that in the employee personal profile section box. And so you have to be an analyst to kind of navigate the tables and understand how they work on the back end, where to pull data, and the Python comes in handy. I had an intern last summer, and the reason I hired her is because I don't know Python. I don't know SQL. I have some basic command information, but there's no way. And she's building all of these reports. She's pulling data out of the SMB HRIS because I knew I needed to go to a bigger HRIS, but it wasn't in the budget. I was having to wait till the next fiscal year. And so what do? I hired an intern that could do my actual data and pull it out. And even then, it was very manual, antiquated. And to try and keep it up after she left, I actually learned, don't tell them this, but I learned that it was actually I loved what she did, but our skill set, we did not have skill set on the team to manage that.
Right.
And then you go to, why you go to Workday? Because then you can create these reports and save them, and then anybody can run them.
Right.
And so that's where it's helpful. But because of the cost, because of what they do, it's kind of like, am I buying a Honda Civic? Or am I buying the new Honda Accord that has, push button and all these other things? It's like, I can't quite afford the Accord. I can afford the Civic. So sometimes it is a budget because we're non-revenue generating, which then comes into play of what things are important at the table for your C-level and senior leadership, to the data you have access to, and build a story with that. The ability to get money or budget for the tools that you need so that you can do things less manually is going to be super helpful.
Right. So this brings me to the next question, right? We talked about affordability. G&A cost is a drag on revenue, right?
Yes, it is.
I couldn't say it any other way. So I apologize to our HR listeners. But I was at a conference and there were like very successful CEOs presenting about their business, talking about their thought process. And one of the CEOs said one of the challenges that they are facing is if they are going to be a 200 or 300 million ARR plus company and try to go public, they are seeing that the G&A costs are not moving linearly, but kind of exponentially, because the cost of people is increasing, right? And it's an unsolved problem in business that, okay, and it comes down to this one HR BP for 150 people or 200 at the max. And if you are a 2,000 person company, you just had 20 people there, right? Yep. So, and that's a lot of cost. And as you keep growing, because organizational growth comes before revenue growth, if you really want to do justice, you have to keep hiring more people. And now we also don't have very good people. So how should you solve for this? Is there a solve for this? Do you change the ratios? Because the honest truth is there is no extra money to give. Right?
No, you're absolutely right. And so what happens is anytime there's the G&A is always post-revenue gains, right? Okay, we've now made enough money. Now we're going to go and hire the people we need in G&A. And then what happens is there's this catch-up period. Those in G&A are like, oh, well, all of these things that we should have built while we were growing all need to be built now. And now you're asking everybody to hurry up and catch up. And that is a very dangerous place to be. But I will tell you that is a very comfortable place that all businesses operate from. And every organization that I've been at in the last 10 years, I mean, there was one time I was the only true HR person. We had an onboarding person, but I was a true HR person to almost 400 people globally. And, when you grow when you're under 100, and it's easy to kind of grow with that exponentially, but trying to insert people into that exponential growth becomes more and more and more difficult, because now you're asking them to do what? Sprint a marathon, which is not feasible. The answer is to be okay, is that as revenue is growing and you're hiring your product and engineering, is that you're growing everything is growing in parallel. But what ends up happening is that G&A runs super lean.
Yeah.
Super lean. People get burnt, and I'm going to say it. G&A is burnt. HR is tired. We're exhausted. And then you hire them all, and then you want them to bend time. Actually, I kind of thrive in that chaos and hyper and startup, and not everything's built out, and things change a lot. But that's not for everybody. And sometimes that can be really difficult, trying to hire and find the right people that are okay with that. A high level of ambiguity, high level of you got to build the plane while you're flying and figure it out as you go along, and being resourceful. And that's why we said at the beginning, you're kind of in survival mode and you persevere, because people that thrive in that are going to be just fine. And again, pause, observe, patience, grace. What is going to get us 5+ years? And you've got to get more proactive about hiring. and, oh, I need this headcount. I need that headcount. That doesn't work well when you're trying to build a sustainable, scalable organization. But we have been operating in that mode for so long.
Kind of become second nature, right, to people. So, but in your opinion, what would you say is, hey, as like a, for the lack of better word, ultimatum to the C-suite and say, if you don't grow the HR organization just in a similar fashion or pattern that you're growing the rest of the organization, what will fail? Some companies which have a very long-term thinking about how they want to build culture and how they want to be powerhouses. Like I would say Microsoft, you can say, right? Microsoft is a powerhouse, right? And Google has been one. People don't leave. Well, I don't know if they're productive or not, but they don't leave. So what gives? Like what, if there is a CEO listening to this podcast, what would you tell them that if you don't do this, what's in store for them?
One, give the HR the tools they need to give you the data you need to make decisions. That is the key. You want data. Well, we need the tools to do the data. Otherwise, you're going to have a very lean HR team doing hours and hours of manual Excel work to give you the data that you're looking for, when there are tools out there that can help. And if that means investing in Workday or UKG or, all of these other larger systems, then do it. But figure out what tools it is that your team needs to be able to make good people decisions. Quit scrimping on the tools.
Convenient. Got it.
If you make the time and go to the grocery store, you're going to get more for your buck, and it's probably going to last longer. It's not an immediate. Pay for the long term. Be willing to pay for the long term. No one is buying a 20-year-old car and thinking it's going to last them another 20 years. You buy a new car and you're going to say, this car is going to last me 20 years. And I'm going to take care of it.
Most importantly, yes.
If you hired people, you hired them for a reason. Don't start doubting them and discounting them. And it's like, listen to what they have to say. I think that's the biggest piece. If I was going to talk to its leadership across the board, and even the VP of HR, sometimes we don't get it either. But that's where you need to sit down and we need to understand what everybody in the business is doing. I think that's really key. What is the pain of product? What is the pain of engineering? What is the product of sales and customer success and marketing and all of these things? What is really going on? But what's going to fail over time if I can't give you the data to make better decisions in terms of hiring, performance, learning? You think about the employee life cycle. If we don't have data in every single one of those houses, then what's going to fail at the end of the day is culture, regretted attrition, employer branding. It's really hard to recover from those things. Those things take incremental actions. I always say you only get one set of first impression, and it takes 100 additional impressions to remove one negative interaction. So if I've had a negative interaction with somebody, it's going to take me 100 other interactions to fix that.
I want to segue into the question around, and you touched a lot of it, but the name of the podcast is the Headcount People, right? I think what are the most important things to look into for headcount planning? Skill
set. What is the skill set you have, and what is the skill set you need? Regular gap analysis on your skill set, because people will grow and other people will not follow. So gaps may be inserted into your team.
How would you go about doing gap analysis? Is it more like qualitative talking to people, or is there some formulaic way of doing it?
Oh, I wish there was a formula of doing this. Again, this is where the people piece comes in. And this is only done because there are relationships between the manager and the employee. So they're having regular one-on-ones. There's professional goals. What are they working on? Are they working on the things they want to work on? Are your team members taking PTO? If nobody on your team is taking PTO, that usually tells you don't have enough people on your team. If somebody says, oh, if I go on PTO, then this won't get done. Or, oh, I can't give that to Bianca because she's already overloaded. It's like, if those are the kinds of conversations happening in your organization, that should tell you right there that you're missing skill, you're missing a person, there's something missing on the team.
Yeah. I think the net what I'm hearing about this is that companies cannot be gaming revenue by artificially reducing G&A. So
Yeah.
I think investors, especially for public market companies, should be starting to look at this, that if companies are underperforming or underinvesting in G&A, especially the HR function, the long-term prospects of that business don't look good. We covered a lot of topics, right? And before we end the conversation today, thank you so much for deep insights. These were not cursory things that you said. I think we got an insight into your expansive career and learned a lot of new things. Like, you gave us the magnifying glass into a lot of different things, and I appreciate that. But I want to end this conversation with your thoughts on, let's say you have this podium to talk to new HR leaders or folks that are really interested in HR. What are your top 3, top 5 points to them? What should they be doing in order to become a strategic partner to the CEO and have that seat on the table? Because I think people should go to your LinkedIn and check that out, because you've done this. You've gotten a seat at the table repeatedly at some marquee companies. So what's that secret sauce?
And, each organization and each group of people is going to be different. There's not, 2 + 2 is 4 all day long, but the dynamics of people are just that dynamic. And so to say like, oh, this is what works. Every organization I've gone into, I will say like, this is the framework, but realizing that there's going to be different steps in each of those frameworks because, oh, this group works this way, or this group of people works this way, or the culture is this way, or the people operate this way. But you have to be the bridge between the employees and leadership. It hurts my soul when I read on social media that HR is not your friend and organizations don't care about their employees and things of that nature. And the reason I still love HR is because the company will always win. Take that off the table. How can I help you win? The company is always going to win. So the thing is any HR person doesn't have to be someone seated at the table, because your seat at the table really starts at the beginning of your career, because the whole reason you have a seat is because employees are coming to you and they're telling you. So building relationships with the employees are going to be key.
Right.
Listening to employees and getting that authentic feedback. May not be feedback you like, but if somebody comes to you and tells you the harsh truth, they trust you. And that's what's super important. And if you can gain that early on, it becomes extremely valuable as you move up the ladder. And that's
information is power, right? So you're getting the information of the people, and then you can be the sounding board for the CEO, because again, they are not getting this information anywhere. There is no magic tool. There is no Jira dashboard for this one.
But what I will say is that you do have, if you can get some data, let's take engagement surveys, because those are all controversial, is that the score can say that the organization is great, but let's go to the comments, all the feedback. Let's dissect the comments, not to figure out who said what, but go look at the comments and then think about all the conversations you've had with employees or managers. And you're like, that doesn't align. Look at the participation rate. If you don't have more than 50% of the people participating, there's something wrong. And those are things I've been doing, whole surveys, so to speak. EMPESs, there was one place we did them every month. And I've been at places where everything is anonymous, which is great, gives people safety and to say whatever they want. And I've been at places where things have been non-anonymous. And it's like, if you don't have the courage to stand up and say it, then this isn't the place for you. So I've been at 2 very different places in terms of what they believe about feedback. And you know what? Both work. So there's not a right and a wrong. You have to figure out what's right for you and your culture. It's kind of like what's right for you as a person may not be right for another person, and that's okay. So having that data, but then also having an intuitiveness to realize that you have this qualitative piece, maybe on the outside, that's not showing the data, and being able to bring those 2 together and then being able to have a conversation. But being able to do that at every level will be super important, because that also brings the experience that I told you about, where you're like, wait a minute, I've seen this trend before. And now you have the experience of being able to say, like, we should not venture on this because I have not seen positive outcomes in the past. And our culture, our people, or this organization represents similarities. And so let's try something new. Relationship building is going to be key. Being the sounding, being that trusted advisor. It's okay. Being true to yourself is going to be super important. What I always say is, like, if you have consistently said what you said, did what you said you were going to do, then that will always outwin anything that the general conversation may be about your role or what you're doing in the organization.
I think it's the opportunistic time to end this conversation. Again, thank you so much for joining us. The key takeaways are that companies must invest in G&A, especially HR. Second, provide HR the tools so that is step number one, so that they can actually bring you the right information to make better decisions, especially around your people. I would say that instead of thinking it just like a cost item, we should think it more like an insurance policy. You need it for future success. Right?
I would actually say it's an investment. Just like you make an investment in product or you're doing an acquisition, all of those things, this is where there's this gap between organizations and employees. You are not investing in your employees. You're seeing them as a liability. You're seeing them as a resource, not as a person. And so that's how employees are feeling. And if that's how they're being treated, well, then that's what you're going to get.
I think that's our mic drop moment. Thank you again, Alisa. Thank you so much for joining us. It was great to speak with you today.
It was great to speak with you, Tushar. I hope that you have gotten all the nuggets that you need to get. And I hope those listening have as well. Being on the people side of business is not an easy place because you are dealing with people and emotions and the dynamics are large. But I will say patience and grace is really key right now. Like we're still recovering from the pandemic. And I know that sounds crazy as we enter into the new year and things, but at the end of the day, people are emotional. People are just emotions, and just give people the gift of time. Just like, it's okay. Just take a breath. That's what I try.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you so much, Alisa.
Thanks, Tushar. Have a great day.